Every time we take on a true cost-no-object speaker, the same two questions always come up. Is it really worth it? And could something, far less expensive get you 90 to maybe even 95% of the way there? And over the past few months, we've tested some serious heavyweights. I'm talking Wilson Audio's new Watt Puppy at nearly 40 grand, Bang & Olufsen's Biolab 50 at 80, and most recently the Klipsch La Scala AL6 at $19,000. Now, it's time to see if Arendal's new 1528 Tower 8 can hang with them. We're a little late to the Arendal review circuit, so let's skip the small talk and get straight to it. This speaker demands three things if it's going to live up to the hype and play in the big leagues. I'm talking space, power, and volume, in that order. Miss even one of those, and honestly, probably not going to be the speaker for you. Now, these speakers are massive, nearly 5 feet tall and tipping the scales at around 200 pounds each. They're going to dominate any room they're in, even one as large as ours. Now, when I say this speaker needs space, I'm not talking about interior design or decor. I'm talking about distance. Distance between the speakers and distance between you and them, because that space is what lets these towers breathe. And when they breathe, they come alive. The Tower 8 uses 6 drivers, all time-aligned within a curved front baffle. However, unlike the SVS Titans, which apply similar principles using an MTM layout, the Arendal places its 1-inch tweeter at the very top, followed by its 5-inch mid-range with the 8-inch woofers below. And this vertical layout means the speaker needs more distance between you and the speaker in order for its drivers to fully integrate. In our room, I ended up placing the 8s about 11 feet apart, towed in slightly towards my listening position at 12 feet away. Now, Arendal actually recommends about 4 meters, or roughly 13 feet, for full top-to-bottom coherence. But in my experience, 12 feet was the sweet spot. Position these, or yourself, any closer, say around 8 feet, and things start to fall apart. The time alignment doesn't quite lock in. The mids and the highs are going to start to kind of float above the woofers, leaving a subtle hole in the center image, especially with vocals or dialogue. I cannot stress this enough. Setup matters here way more than most speakers, even other time-aligned designs like the Titans. But to their credit, Arendal is very upfront about this in their own documentation. When it comes to power, the Tower 8 doesn't technically need hundreds of watts to come alive, but whatever amp you choose needs to be stable with low impedance loads. These can dip below 4 ohms, so you'll want something that's comfortable driving 4 ohm speakers and can put out a solid 100 to 200 watts per channel. Now, I tested at least a dozen amps with these, and the combo I liked best was the Macintosh MSA 5500 I just reviewed. It delivers 160 watts into 4 ohms under the latest FTC guidelines, and it just had the right mix of control and dynamics to bring these towers to life. With the Macintosh running the show and the speakers dialed in properly in our 450 square foot room, the Arendals hit 20 hertz in room. There was a little extra energy between 40 and 80 hertz, which is totally normal for most spaces, and then the response followed a nice, linear, and predictable slope down to 20 kilohertz. When I factored in the room's influence, my in-room measurements are pretty much in line with Arendal's own anechoic charts. That tells me that the Tower 8's performance is incredibly predictable, as long as you give it the space and the power it needs. When it comes to performance, the Tower 8 is all about neutrality. It's intentionally clean, controlled, and really doesn't add much in the way of its own character, and that is very much by design. The bass performance is impressive. In our setup, I never once felt the need for a separate subwoofer. It was nuanced, weighty, and it gives instruments like kick drums or big cinematic effects a real sense of grounding, the kind that feels believable. That said, the overall impact, that physical movement of air, doesn't quite hit the same level as something like the Wilson Watt Puppy or our Biolab 50s. Those still deliver a little more slam, a bit more visceral punch, but that's not a knock against the Arendal. It's just where you start to notice the difference between a truly cost-no-object speaker and something that's doing its best to play in the same waters. The mid-range on the Tower 8 is where things get really interesting. It has this almost electrostatic level of transparency, but with more body and weight behind it, which makes vocals and mid-range heavy instruments sound lifelike and three-dimensional. Artists like Beth Hart or David Gray, for example, came through with an incredible sense of realism. That solid in-room presence that feels like they're right there, just maybe a half step behind the speaker's front baffles, but never forced or too in your face. What I didn't hear were any boxy resonance or cabinet colorations, the kind that can make vocals sound a bit more chesty or horn-like. Even when I pushed the volume past moderate levels, the mid-range stayed clear and intelligible. When it comes to the treble, the Tower 8 is neutral, smooth, and free of any harsh peaks. Now, some of you may describe the tweeter as a little on the, dry side, and honestly, I wouldn't argue that. It doesn't quite have the same sparkle or shimmer up top that you get from the Wilsons or even our Beolab 50s. For me, a great tweeter isn't just about avoiding fatigue or distortion at the limits of human hearing. It's about control. It should be able to hit that metallic sheen of a cymbal or the ping of a piano trill without ever sounding too sharp or painful. When I listened closely for those moments, the Arendal felt just a bit reserved and a little rolled off. Now, both the mid-range and treble can be fine-tuned right on the speaker's crossover panel using a simple set of jumpers. Do they work? Yeah, they do. But don't expect night and day changes. The adjustments are limited to about plus or minus 2 decibels, so it's not as dramatic as tweaking your preamp or integrated amp's tone controls. Still, it is a nice feature. It gives you a way to tailor the sound to your room or personal taste without bringing DSP or extra digital processing into the chain. And I know a lot of purists are going to appreciate that. On a personal note, it was so much easier to use than whatever the hell Klipsch invented on the back of the new La Scala. Moving on to soundstage and dynamics, two traits that, in my experience, are directly tied to the third must-have on my list, volume. Arendal proudly claims the Tower 8 can hit up to 118 dB without distortion, and that's impressive. But what's not immediately clear is how much volume is required to reach the summit. So I'm just going to say it. Below about 70 to 75 decibels, the Tower 8 isn't all that exciting. It's not bad, but it's not the kind of speaker that wows you at lower listening levels. This is not a background listening speaker. At lower volumes, performance is about on par with a much more modest tower or even a good bookshelf speaker that costs way less. Honestly, during casual, low-volume sessions, I preferred our Sonus Faber Lumina 2s. Heck, even the Beolab 8s delivered more nuance and detail when listening at more background levels. But once you start turning up the Arendals, that's when they start showing you what they can really do. Once you get the Tower 8s up into that 90 dB range and beyond, they're unflappable. Clean, clear, and free of any breakup or distortion. This is where their true scale really comes alive, where the sound finally breaks free of the boxes and fills the room. The stage opens up wide and deep with strong definition and detail throughout. They make great home theater speakers, by the way. But again, drop below those kind of, quote, appointment listening levels, and these things start to collapse inward. The sound becomes confined, stuck inside the cabinets, and you can actually locate each speaker even with your eyes closed. So, is the Arendal 1528 a giant killer? Does it dethrone speakers like Wilson Audio's Watt Puppy or my Beolab 50s? No. And here's why. There's more to the high-end experience than just sound quality. Things that brands like Wilson and Bang & Olufsen absolutely nail, even if you aren't paying a premium for it. Those details, the service, the presentation, the overall ownership experience, these are all areas where Arendal just misses the mark with the Tower 8. If there were ever a speaker that came with a warning label, it's this one. Because unlike the Watt Puppy or the Beolab 50, the Arendal is sold direct and drop shipped right to your door via freight. That means moving and unboxing each nearly 200-pound speaker is entirely on you. Heck, you may even be tasked, like I was, with physically getting them off the truck, never mind to your front door. As a reviewer, I've received countless big deliveries, everything from large speakers to big TVs, so I've come to expect certain frustrations. But without a doubt, these are some of the most difficult speakers I've ever had to get into the house, set up, and ultimately live with. And for a product aiming to run in the high-end crowd, there's really nothing high-end about this part of the experience. Dismiss me all you want for making a big deal about the Tower 8's size and delivery process. You may not be paying Wilson Audio money, but at almost $11,000, I believe the overall experience still matters. But here's the real stinger. When you consider what the 8s cost versus other Arendal designs, which is anywhere from 2 to 5 times more, only the delivery, unboxing, and setup experience feels exactly the same as it does with their less expensive models. That extra investment isn't buying you a better ownership experience. And at these higher prices, it's just not a great look. Now, Arendal's CEO assured us over a month ago that in response to my concerns surrounding the delivery process, a white glove delivery option would be instituted at checkout for a fee. However, as of this review at least, this option has not made it to Arendal's website, nor have I been given specific details on what white glove really means in practice, a question we've asked more than once. Regardless, I would not order these without the upgraded delivery. If you're okay with all of that, and you can meet the 3 big requirements to get the most out of the Arendal 1528 Tower 8, you probably aren't going to be disappointed. Now, visually, these just aren't my cup of tea. They're big, too big, and a little too dominating for my personal taste. And that's saying something because we currently have a 116-inch TV on our wall, not to mention I own the SVS Titans and have lived with big speakers like Bowers & Wilkins 800s, not to mention the absolutely massive Beolab 90s for a while. The difference is, again, at least to me, those speakers are sculptural. They make a design statement. The 8s don't. They're functional, they're just not particularly interesting in form or materials. And believe it or not, they're almost a foot taller than our Titans. Let me be clear, this is not a knock against the 8's build quality. They are solidly made, and for some of you, might be exactly what the doctor ordered. Looks are subjective, and if you like the traditional industrial aesthetic, these could totally work for you. When you stack the Arendal Tower 8s up against some of the reference grade speakers we've reviewed, like again, the Klipsch La Scala, Wilson Audio Watt Puppy, and Bang & Olufsen Beolab 50, the results are actually pretty surprising. In terms of pure performance, the Arendals absolutely destroy the Klipsch. The 8 has bass, a better soundstage with better depth and definition, and they can play equally as loud as a La Scala, for those of you who like to hold concerts in your living room. And sonically, it's good enough to be mentioned in the same breath as the Watt Puppy and even the Beolab 50. Yeah, it is that good. But it doesn't quite pull off the upset. The Arendal is a more specialized product in almost every way. The Wilson and the Beolab 50, price aside, don't really come with any fine print. You just set them up, power them on, and they deliver. The Arendal, on the other hand, demands more from you, more space, power, and volume before it truly begins to shine. If you can't give this speaker what it needs, don't ruin a good time by trying to convince yourself you're getting the full experience. Trust me, you're not. Do yourself a favor and grab the 1528 bookshelf version of these instead. But getting back on topic, even when you compare the Tower 8s to other speakers in its price range, or maybe even a bit cheaper, like Monitor Audio's Platinum 200 3G, Bowers & Wilkins 702 Signature, Kef's R11 Meta, or SVS's newer Titan, the Arendal beats some of them in certain areas, but it gives up ground in others. Take the Platinum 200 3G for example. It's a little more expensive, but better finished, and honestly, just as capable sonically. It delivers this same kind of excitement and performance as the Arendal without taking over your room. And you don't have to crank it to reference levels to hear what you paid for. What else? Bowers & Wilkins 702 S3 signatures at $9,900 for the pair. They won't be as neutral as the Arendal. I mean, they're B&W. And they won't play as loud without distortion, but between the goalposts of everyday life, they play loud enough. At lower volumes, they'll be more intelligible and dynamic. And again, looks are subjective, but it's hard to deny the finish options are just more elegant on the B&Ws. Then there's the KEF R11 Meta, which retails for almost half the price of the Arendal, and aside from absolute bass extension, it delivers a very similar level of neutrality. While subjectively I prefer the KEF visually, objectively it does take up less space and doesn't need nearly as much fuss when it comes to placement to sound its best. Now, to be fair, the R11 Meta cannot play as deep in the low end without help from a subwoofer, and depending on what you listen to, that might be the deal breaker. But if you're planning to run a sub anyway, whether for music or home theater, you could easily save yourself both money and visual space by going with the KEF. The R11 Meta is by far the easier speaker to come home with. As for the SVS Titans, the best way to think about them compared to the Arendal is this. They're like smaller, livelier versions of the Tower 8. They can dig deep, not quite as low as the Arendals, and the bass has a bit more boom and a little less control. But on the flip side, the Titans are easier to enjoy at lower volumes. They stay engaging and intelligible without needing to crank things up, and because they're smaller, they're far easier to position and fit into different rooms. And yeah, they're dropship too, but unboxing and setting them up is a breeze by comparison. Plus, all of the speakers I've talked about in this review, the Titans are the least expensive, and yet they don't give up much in terms of overall performance. That said, if you're chasing ultimate neutrality and textbook measurements, the Arendal is likely the better speaker for you. So where does that leave us with the Arendal 1528 Tower 8? It's not a high-end giant killer, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be. What it is a seriously capable loudspeaker that delivers reference-level performance when you give it the space, power, and volume it demands. For those chasing neutrality and precision above all else, this might be the one. But for everyone else, especially if you value everyday ease or design, there are more friendlier, more versatile options out there. Now, if Arendal were ever to get really serious about their finish options and go out of their way to improve the ownership and delivery experience, the old guard high-end audio brands, they might have something to lose sleep over. So that's it. That is finally my review of Arendal's 1528 Tower 8 monster speaker. How'd I do? What'd you think? Sound off in the comments below. Remember, at the end of the day, the only person who has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye.